Good morning and good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. Welcome very much to our webinar. My name is Tiffany Fry and I will be moderating today. Today we are presenting Scatter Matters, Best Practices for Radiation Protection in the Cath Lab. Our presenters today are Dr. Bob Wilson from Egg Medical and Jackie Doffing from LANDAUER. So first of all, Dr. Bob Wilson is the founder and chief executive officer at Egg Medical. He is a practicing interventional cardiologist at the University of Minnesota, where he has been on staff since 1986. He was the director of the cardiac cath lab from 1988 through 2004, and he served as chief of cardiology from 2008 through 2013. Dr. Wilson has a passion for advancing the science of interventional cardiology and has been active in research and product development for many years. Before starting Egg Medical, Dr. Wilson was the catalyst behind ACIST Medical, and he started Egg Medical as a solution to radiation exposure, focusing on creating a system that protected everyone in the room with no impact to workflow. Jackie Doffing is certified in radiology, CT, and MRI, and has a robust background consulting with a variety of radiology and physics groups to help them select radiation safety products and services for their team. Working in all aspects of radiology over her career, she brings a wealth of knowledge to her presentation today. Jackie is currently completing a BSRT with a healthcare administration minor. She should be graduating in June from Marian University, and she resides just outside Minneapolis, Minnesota. With that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Wilson.
Great. Well, hey, thank you very much for the introduction. I appreciate it. And what I want to accomplish today is I want to tell you a little bit about my journey through radiation protection. You know, as an interventional cardiologist, I would say, you know, for the most of my career, I was probably a pretty average user of radiation shielding, and you know, I wasn't that concerned. And then, you know, as you get older, I've had several friends with what are clearly radiation-related illnesses, myeloma, lymphoma, a number of other cancers. And so, you know, you kind of wish you had been better with shielding earlier. And what I realized was that I didn't really know much about shielding. I didn't know much about radiation. I think most physicians don't. A lot of people on this call probably do because, you know, because you're rad techs or RSOs. But if you can go to the next slide, please, I will. Just seeing the LANDAUER slide right now.
Jackie, if you could press the play button. I think you still have your screen paused.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, you know, it's ubiquitous in webcasts that these things happen. So, and so a little bit about what I'm going to talk about is you know, the impact of chronic radiation exposure for 20, 30, 40, if you're lucky, 50 years, being radiated every day. You know, we haven't had much information on that until recently, because if you want to know what happens after 30 years of radiation exposure, you have to wait 30 years. And the problem is now it's been 30 years and we do up. Would that be possible, you think? Or maybe Tiffany, maybe you could bring them up?
Jackie, did you press the play button?
Yes, I did, and I'm not having any luck with it.
All right, could you stop sharing your screen and then start again?
Sure.
All right. So anyway, so, you know, and I'm sure that a lot of you have had a similar experience with radiation-related illnesses. And you know, when I talk to people, sometimes people say, well, you know, is there really a problem? And my usual response is, well, if you're over 50, everybody knows somebody with the radiation-related illness. And usually at that point, there's no further discussion. So as part of my journey, you know, I had to really understand scatter radiation and understand where it is, how to measure it, and then finally how to really prevent it. Because at the end of the day, it should be a big mechanical engineering project. You should be able to protect everybody in the room from scatter radiation without significantly interfering in the workflow. And that's that's kind of how Egg Medical got started. So great, that's first slide. If you go to the next slide, that would be great. So we're coming on the questions. So Tiffany, do you want to take these? So what's your primary function in the cath lab? If you could just select one of those.
And that first poll question has been launched. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. And for attendees, please proceed to enter your response. For this first poll question, we greatly appreciate your participation in our poll questions today. And the responses are coming in, and I will give participants about another 30 seconds to enter their response before we close our first question. And it appears that responses are continuing to come in. And let's go ahead and close this poll question because we have quite a bit of material that we would like to cover today. So I'm going to go ahead and close, and I will share the results. And so, as you can see, 1% of the audience is physician. We have about 20% of the audience are nurse technologist, excuse me, 12% administrator, manager, 38% are radiation safety officer or physicist, and the other 29% is other. So thank you again for your participation in today's poll question.
Yeah, it's great, and I'm really thrilled to see the administrators online because a lot of the radiation protection efforts are really dependent on administrators who can provide the solutions for their staff and protect their staff through their ability to, control the purse string. So, I'm talking a little bit about the problem, the occupational risks, and then at least our solution to this, and then Jackie's going to talk about real-time dosimetry, which I think, it's amazing. You go to a nuclear power plant, everybody's got a dosimeter on. Everybody's got a real-time dosimeter, so you know if you're getting radiated or not. It's not something where you send a badge off and then 3 months later you get something back. Everybody's got something, and Jackie's going to talk about that. So if you go to the next slide, please. Another poll question. So how would you rate your knowledge about the effects of radiation exposure? I can tell you when I started this, I was either I don't know much or I don't know anything. And through a period of 10 years, I don't know if I'm an expert, but I definitely learned a lot. And, it's not that hard to learn to a certain extent. You just have to be practical.
Thanks, Dr. Wilson, for your feedback on that. And once again, the responses are coming in. We'll give participants about 30 seconds to enter their response. And then we'll go ahead and get the poll closed.
Well, we've got a pretty expert group here. We've got nurses and rad techs and RSOs. I hope the RSOs are pretty knowledgeable. They should be.
Okay, wonderful. We're going to go ahead and close that poll question, and I'll share the results. And so here we go. I'm an expert. 9% of the audience, 58% of the audience said, I know a lot. 32% of the audience indicated, I don't know much. And 2% indicated, I don't know anything. So thanks again for your reply.
Yeah, so 10 years ago, I would have been in that 2%. So and if you go to the next slide. So let me just talk a little bit about scatter. And I know if you guys probably know a lot of this, but the shocking thing to me when we first started making measurements, and we've probably made 15, 20, 30,000 measurements now over the last number of years, is that only about 1% to 2% of what comes out of that X-ray tube housing actually makes it to the detector to make the image that you see on the right. The other, 97, 98, 99% of the photons are either absorbed by the patient or they're reflected by the patient. And that reflected radiation from the patient, makes up the backscatter in the room. So you're basically creating a radiation field within the room. Now, one other interesting thing that we presented a few years ago was about the source of scatter radiation. It turns out not all of it's the patient, but 18% of it comes from tube housing leakage. Part of that is leakage around the primary beam, and part of it is just coming straight out of that tube housing. We've measured the radiation output, and by the time you get to the top of the tube housing, you typically get somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 microsieverts per hour coming out of that, way over the standard. But if you take the whole tube housing within the standard, we put a lead cozy, like a beer cozy, on the top with just a hole for the primary beam. And it turns out if you do that, you cut the scatter radiation in the room by 18%. So that's about a quarter of the, no, it's a fifth. A fifth of the radiation that you're getting in the room is really coming from tube housing leakage, which is kind of shocking. It turns out the patient dose, about 9% of the patient dose also comes from tube housing leakage. That is not calculated into the DAP that you get on the screen. That's a calculated number assumed where it's the primary beam, but in fact, the patient's actually getting about 9% more from this tube housing scatter as well. Next slide, please. So you might say, well, how much could it be? And well, it turns out, if you look at some comparables, it's not such a small amount of radiation you're getting every day. These are the radiation levels in Fukushima after the nuclear accident. And when you go, and this is from the prefecture, and you can see a whole bunch of different areas there. But if you go 1 week out in Fukushima, so not the day of the accident, but a week out, the average dose, you get about 72 microsieverts in a day. If you're in the Cath lab, the average person is getting about 125 to 300 microsieverts. So a day in the Cath lab is actually more than being a day in Fukushima, and that's when the town was evacuated. So you're getting a lot every day that you're there. Next slide, please. And this is not unknown. The International Atomic Energy Agency surveys occupations periodically for the extent of radiation exposure. Interventional physicians have the highest radiation exposure of any profession, about 2.5 times the nearest competitor, which is a nuclear power plant worker. And again, as I said, nuclear power plants are loaded with monitors everywhere. You go to a hospital, hardly a monitor anywhere. You might have a personal dosimeter. You definitely have one that they send out, every month, which is not really actionable. But the reality is that we're underprepared, in my opinion, in most hospitals for effective radiation protection that's actionable. Next slide, please. So, what's the impact of that? This is from the radiation guidelines through the AHA-ACC. And this is from the National Research Council looking at the risk for radiation exposure. And what you can see here is that if you're a high volume operator and you're getting 10 milligrays per year and you have a career, your cancer risk, if you're a man, is about 3%. If a woman, it's about 4.25%. The risk of mortality, occupational mortality from doing your job, is about 1 in 50 overall. And again, women more than men. Next slide. So it's a significant risk. Next. And we know that from a lot of case control studies now that the incidence of cancer, mostly glioblastomas, which predominantly occur on the left side of the brain in interventional cardiologists, myelomas, lymphomas, leukemias, et cetera. Thyroid cancer to a certain extent, but you do have a thyroid collar, which probably gives you better protection, but about 3 times the incidence of cancer, 6 times the incidence of cataracts. That's in multiple studies, including one by the Canadian government, the French government. And I know we had a woman in our lab a nurse who was a close talker to patients right up by the head where there's a huge radiation dose, as you'll see. And she had a double cataract surgery in her 40s, which made a huge impact on me. And then vascular injury. The vascular endothelium is very sensitive to radiation, and the carotid thickness on the left side, left carotid is thicker than the right carotid, which of course is where you get more radiation. And then, some talk about dementia and chromosomal changes, which you can see in white blood cells that are circulating of people that are interventional cardiologists versus non-interventional cardiologists. So, there's significant occupational health risks, and we know that because people have been exposed now for 30 or 40 years, and we've been able to detect this. Next slide, please. So, when I started this, so the question is where is the scatter radiation? What's the pattern around the table? If you're really going to try and intercept it, you need to have very granular information about where it's coming from. So we got a anthropomorphic phantom. You can see in the lower right that big yellow guy sitting on the cath lab table. It's a calibrated phantom. We also verified that it gives a scatter pattern similar to cadavers. And then we used a ray-safe survey meter around the table. And so we collected measurements at 6 places around the table where people typically stand. You can see that in the middle diagram there. And I think most people would agree, you know, the nurse 1.5 meters from the table, anesthesia, echo over the left shoulder, the operator, rad tech. And in each of those positions, we measured scatter radiation from the floor to 2 meters up every 20 centimeters. So we knew the vertical and the circumferential distribution of scatter radiation in a very granular way. If you go to the next slide, please. So here's what we found. So again, the positions on the left over there. On the right diagram, what you're seeing in blue is the average scatter radiation dose from the floor to 2 meters up for each of those positions around the table: echo, anesthesia, EP tech, which is really right next to the chest, angiographer, rad tech, and nurse 1.5 meters away. And what you can see is that, the red bars are the peak dose anywhere in that 2 meter height. You know, typically that's right around the mattress or just below the mattress. And what you can see is that the head's hot. The head's very hot. The angiographer position is the next hot. The rad tech actually has the lowest dose of almost anybody in the room, less than the nurse, typically 2 meters away, or 1.5 meters away. And we think the reason the head is so hot is because the scapula are great reflectors. So the beam comes up from below, and these are cardiac procedures, and you get this very nice halo of radiation around the head of the patient, really kind of from about the mid-chest all the way around. So if you're at the head, and the nurse, as you know, is often at the head, that's where you're getting the highest dose. Next slide, please. So this looks at the vertical distribution of scatter radiation around the table for each of those positions that we measured. And what you can see here is that the bulk of the scatter radiation is below the table. In this study, we put the table at 1 meter height, and you can see that about 69% of the scatter comes from below the table, a little over 2/3, a little under 1/3 is above the table. So the head's hot, below the table is hot. Next slide, please. And there are other factors that affect the volume of scatter radiation in the room. And, you know, I know we've got people on the webcast here who are from around the country, and, you know, I'm from Minnesota, and we've got a few obese patients left. And I understand that in other parts of the country, there may be a few obese patients, but this is a Ryan Matter study looking at the influence of BMI on scatter radiation and on patient dose. So if you look on the left graph, you can see the patient dose. And as the BMI goes from less than 25 to more than 40, you can see, you know, the dose for the patient goes up about 2.1-fold. But look at the right side. On the right side is the operator radiation dose. And you can see that as the patient goes from 25 to 40, that the scatter radiation dose the operator is exposed to goes up by 7-fold. So as patients get bigger and bigger, there's a disproportionate increase in scatter radiation. And as we all know, there are a lot of these patients around, and that has significantly added to the radiation exposure. You know, the X-ray companies have done some job in bringing the dose down, but the patients have done a good job in bringing it back up again. Next slide, please. So, you know, you're using standard shielding, and people say, well, you know, I'm wearing an apron, and I'm using a hanging shield and a table skirt, and, you know, I should be protected. And, you know, you are protected some, but you should think of shielding. Shielding is a filter. It's not a shield. It's like sunglasses. It's going to take out a certain amount of those photons, but not going to take out all of them. So when you look at an apron with 0.25 millimeter lead equivalency, that's got about a 19% leak. So about 1 in 5 of those photons are coming right through that apron, right at you. Now, as you go up to a thicker and thicker lead equivalent apron, you know, with 0.5, you're at 3 to 4% roughly. And I don't know if anybody wears a 0.7, but, you know, you're 1% leak. So a lot of people wear 0.25 aprons, and they're really only filtering out about 80%, 81% of what comes out of them. Now, there may be a little difference between aprons, but that's an average figure. So standard shielding is good. It's just not sufficient. So next slide, please. survey question. What type of shielding are you currently using? And I think they can check all those. Is that right, Tiffany? All that apply?
Yep.
Yes, that's correct.
All right.
Yep. And that poll question has been launched. And we will give participants about 45 seconds to enter their responses. We'll give you guys a little bit longer on this one.
I am very curious to see the answer to this. I hope everybody's checking apron.
And the responses are coming in. About 50% of our audience has voted. Well, as I indicated, we'll give you a little bit longer on this one.
Yeah, 50%. That's a typical voting rate, isn't it, for the country?
Yes.
That's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. And those responses continue to come in. This is our third poll question. So once again, we do appreciate your participation in our poll questions. And we will go ahead and close that poll question now. And I can share those results. So let's see, 90% indicated apron, 13% disposable radiation pads, 48% other wearable protection, 64% indicated portable barriers, and 8% indicated radiation protection system.
All right. Well, I'm going to try and convince you to move to the next level of a radiation protection system, and that's the there's more than one out there, so I'm not going to do one, but the one that I know, of course, is the one that we developed, which is the egg nest protection system. So I'm going to describe that to you, and in doing that, I think one of the philosophical things that is important is that we all recognize the principle of ALARA, as low as reasonably allowable, that we should have as little radiation exposure as possible. And what was possible 5-10 years ago is different from what's possible now. We've really moved the needle, and you can get a lot less now with the available technology that we just didn't have 5 or 10 years ago. So ALARA has moved, and I would say that most labs are probably not practicing ALARA at this point. They're not bad, and they're using the shielding that we've historically had, the legacy shielding, but the needle's moved a little bit on ALARA. So if you go to the next slide, please. We've kind of divided systems into two. One are what we call barrier systems. And barrier systems are where somebody hides behind a shield or something in order to reduce their dose, but it's not affecting the dose of everybody in the room. And one of the things when we started developing the egg nest system, one of the philosophies behind it was we wanted to protect everyone, not just the doctor. And the second thing was, you can't interrupt the workflow. People just don't use things where the workflow is interrupted. It's got to be relatively easy to set up. And in this case, we have one disposable drape, so not a lot for the techs to put out. So if you go to the next slide, we start with a carbon fiber frame. We realized when we started doing this that if we were really going to have shielding below the table, above the table, we're going to have something to attach that to. And so we developed this carbon fiber sled. As I said before, the mattress can be a big emitter. And so we put shielding inside this carbon fiber sled, and we put rails on the side of the carbon fiber sled to hang additional shielding. And then we put a mattress inside of that. And that mattress has got CPR support as well. So it's much firmer around the chest than it is around the rest for built-in CPR support. But it's carbon fiber, it's strong, it's light, it's radiolucent, its attenuation is relatively low, and prevents leakage from the mattress piece. So there'll be a topper mattress on this. One of the other things we found was kind of interesting is that everybody wants to put something under the mattress, and so we created a 2-level mattress with a topper that's on top of that allows you to, if you have a jam board or something you want to put under it, no problem. Next slide, please. So here you can see the system as it's fully configured. There are flex shields below the table that attach to the egg nest. Now, when we first did this, obviously we saw there's a lot of radiation below the table, so we just basically made a lead tablecloth. And let me tell you, that doesn't work. It doesn't work because It interferes with the X-ray gantry. It interferes with the position detector, so the proximity detector, so it shuts down the gantry. And sometimes it even gets in the way and bends and gets in the way of the beam. So we created some special stays, kind of like a dress stay, inside there that are springs that allow this lower shielding to move with the X-ray gantry and interact with the gantry, not with the tube housing. And that eliminates the effect on image and also eliminates the proximity detector going off. Above the table, we have what are called flip shields. Flip shields. The flip shields flip up and down, as the name kind of connotes. And the reason is that we want these shields to be up during the procedure, but you've got to load the patient off and on. And so to load them off and on, when the patient comes off, the flip shields come down, new patient goes on, the flip shields go back up again. Very simple to set up. All this is going to be under the regular drape, so you don't have to have a special drape. And then finally, we have this thing called the clear spot shield. That's on a rail, so you can move it up and down the table and articulate it, just kind of like a computer monitor in a sense. That blocks a lot of the radiation that's coming off of the abdomen. When you use this in combination with the hanging shield you have in the room, you basically create this huge wall of radiation shielding. And that dramatically reduces the radiation exposure for everybody south of that. On the head, there's a head box because there's a lot of stuff coming off the head, as we talked about. That's getting the nurse, anesthesia, echo. That head box is dramatically reducing the dose around the head. And also we've got a piece under that because, as I told you, the patient dose goes up by about 9% because of this leakage around the primary beam that's coming directly up at the patient. Turns out that the patient head dose is predominantly what's coming up from below. The neck's a great radiation shield. It's very thick. And so you're getting some off the shoulders and the body, but a lot of it is just coming directly up from the bottom. And we're able to shield that and reduce the head dose by about 80% or so. Next slide, please. So here you can see it in the lab. On the left, it's ready to receive patients. So the bed comes up, patient comes over. On the right, the flip shields are up. And then you can see it draped, in the middle. And on the right, you can see it draped as it would be. And, you know, our best compliment we get is you say, well, how did you like it? And people say, well, how did you like what? And because it's meant to blend into the background. Next slide. All right, so what about performance? So, you know, I showed you our measurement technique around the table, 6 positions, floor to 2 meters up every 20 centimeters. The first thing we try to do, as I told you, we wanted to reduce the dose for everybody. And so to do that, you have to reduce the total volume of radiation in the room. You're not really just trying to create a little shadow for somebody to stand behind. You're trying to just get rid of the radiation in the room. And this shows you that effect. So we added up all the scatter radiation doses from the floor to 2 meters up in all those positions to get an idea of the total volume. You can see that here, and you can also see the effect of angulation. So we do it in all the angles, not just PA. I mean, you know, nobody works in the PA, right? I mean, well, a little bit, but for practical purposes, almost all procedures are done in angulated projections. And so we need to be able to suppress in every one of those angles. So if you look at the PA projection, the dark blue is no shielding, the light blue is standard shielding, the hanging shield and the table skirt. And then the green is the egg nest. And as you can see, you know, I mean, standard shielding has an effect on total room scatter, but, you know, it's modest because it's only for a certain portion of the room, and it's not really intended to reduce total room scatter. And then as you go to the right, you can see the effects of angulation on the scatter cloud in the room. And you go to LAO caudal, look at that. I mean, you're picking up a lot of abdomen. It's a very steep angle, and you can see that it's almost 4 times the dose of the PA projection. The volume of radiation is about 4 times, and you can see again, you know, standard shielding has an effect. It's not huge. The egg nest is about a 91% protection in that view. And then if you go to the next slide, please. You can see the protection levels around the table. You know, it varies, of course, you know, depending on where you're at around the table. You know, the echo person, 97%, the angiographer, 92%. The average is 91% around the table. And, you know, and as you angulate, some of those percentages change. But again, it's surprising. The average stays about 91%. Next slide, please. All right, so that was our first radiation suppression system. And we moved on since. So we learned a lot, and we've learned a lot about what people want. and how to really integrate with all procedures. It's not just cardiac, but interventional radiology. I think we just did a kyphoplasty yesterday. So we've created a platform called the Protect platform, which you can see here in the middle. It's thinner. The flex shields retract to allow spins for CT. Again, you can put Jamboard style flip shields in there if you want to, and there's a disposable shield component. And then we created what's called the Complete. And we hear a lot of people just want to get out of their lead. And we have a long discussion about whether that's the best thing to do or whether you should just be wearing lighter lead or whatever. But people want close to zero dose, and I hear that. So we created the Complete system. The Complete system takes a Protect, and then we have an upper shield that's on a boom. It's a 1 millimeter lead equivalency, and this shield gives, for the operator and anybody behind the operator, over 99% protection. And in fact, you're getting absolute doses, in the range of somewhere between 7 and 22 microsieverts per hour as a dose when the X-ray is on, and that's 15 frames. So this is the progression of products, and now really I think with Complete, we've gotten to a point where the effective radiation dose is now below that of scatter radiation that you get walking around town. Next, please. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jackie Doffing, who's going to talk about dosimetry. And for us, for example, with Complete or anything, if you think you're going to take your lead off, you have to be wearing real-time dosimetry. Because people make mistakes, things happen, and it's very important. So we're really happy to partner with LANDAUER on real-time dosimetry. And again, I said, that's a nuclear power plants. It's everywhere else radiation is. Healthcare needs to start coming up to the modern standard of having dosimetry that is actionable. It's one thing to send your badge away and then 3 months later they tell you, what, you kind of had a bad April. That was really bad. Well, you can't really do anything about April, but if it's real time, then I can make adjustments on the fly and reduce my dose. So Jackie?
Thank you very much. I think we're going to advance to the next slide and do another poll. What type of dosimetry are you currently using?
And that poll question has been launched. Thanks, Jackie. Responses are coming in, and we will give attendees about 30 seconds to enter their response. And once again, with this question, you can select all that apply. And let's see, responses continue to roll in. Thanks again, everyone, for your participation in our poll questions. And let's see. And we're going to go ahead and close this poll question, and I can share the results. So let's see, we have about 83% of the audience indicated passive badge, 14% indicated digital badge, 10% indicated real time, 40% of the audience indicated ring, and 5% of the audience indicated lens of eye.
That's very interesting data. Thank you, Edna. Well, as you well know, these are typical dosimeters worn in the cath lab. The collar, Luxel Plus, the ring, and the lens of eye. This is required by the state and federal regulations to measure the amount of radiation exposure in our workplace. Reports come after exposure. This has always occurred and doesn't do anything to help reduce and prevent exposure in real time. We're going to do a little overview of the RaySafe i3 that is being sold with the complete egg system. It is difficult for medical staff to judge how much they are doing and while in the middle of the procedure. That's why the RaySafe developed real-time dosimetry. Real-time dosimetry such as RaySafe i3 system will show personal dose rates in real time, visualized as colored bars on the screen. We have two different versions of the i3, a standalone system and a integrated on-screen display, depicted in this picture. At top center, that is the standalone system, which can be sold with a separate screen and can be placed almost anywhere in the room for staff to be conveniently located for staff. On the right side of the boom, you can see the integrated system displayed along with procedural data. In this presentation, we will be focusing on the RaySafe i3 standalone configuration, which is depicted in this picture on the lower right-hand corner. For basic functionality, it only requires a power supply. As soon as you pick up a dosimeter, it starts to communicate with the screen, and the dosimeter will appear on the screen a second or so after it is picked up. A total number of 8 dosimeters can be displayed on one screen at one time. When radiation is picked up by the dosimeter, the dose rate is visualized as a moving color bar on the screen. The screen is updated every second, so you can easily follow how your movements or actions can affect your dose rate. The real-time dosimeter is convenient to use. It has a custom built-in radio that communicates with the screen in the exam room. It is not networked, so this is a standalone system. It has a multicolor status LED on the left side. Also, it uses solid state sensors and onboard processors for storage of dose data. In addition, it has an interchangeable color inserts for the front, so you can easily identify what dosimeter on the display screen you are using. It has a replaceable battery and a micro USB connector to export dose data. It also has an onboard accelerometer, which allows for a sleep and automatic wake-up mode with movement. Additionally, we have 2 softwares, one called the Dose Viewer and the second one called RaySafe Dose Manager. The Dose Viewer is our free software that is sent with the system, or it is downloadable free from our website. This software gives you basic functionality of the dosimeter. It also is required for initial system setup and configuration. By connecting the dosimeter to your computer, you can get an overview of the dose data. But there are other options that you can change on the dosimeter. You can change the name, the color, general information. You can even personalize the dosimeters. Additionally, there are power function options on the dosimeters. So you can change that to an on mode, or you can also continue to use the accelerometers, which will wake the dosimeter up upon movement of the dosimeter from the sleep or idle position. There's also a power off on the dosimeter if you want to transport dosimeters and save the battery life. The advanced software we offer, the RaySafe Dose Manager, is a more advanced software that can be purchased. It is an advanced version of the Dose Viewer software. What it allows for is advanced visualization of the data pulled from standalone systems that are connected to a local network. It allows for you to pull dose data from all the dosimeters, from all the systems, if you have multiple systems, into one single database, which allows for easy comparison of dose data between different operating rooms and operating teams, depending on your setup in the different systems. In-depth analysis makes it easier for staff to understand and learn from each other, to understand why their team received less dose than another, even if they are doing the same procedures. This slide depicts the new guidelines published by the European Society for Vascular Surgery. It is an organization focused on education and best practices when it comes to vascular surgeries. Sorry about that. It is an organization focused on education, the best practices when it comes to vascular surgery. They release guidelines and good practices not only used in Europe, they are also adopted all over the world. A few months ago, the ESVS released new guidelines recommending the use of real-time dosimetry. They also find it really powerful and say it should be considered for all endovascular operating rooms. This is yet another proof that RaySafe i3 has made a big impact on creating radiation awareness for increased staff safety. We have, of course, received plenty of good feedback from hospitals all over the world, and it is clear that the RaySafe i3 really helps staff reduce their dose, makes them feel more comfortable and safe at work. Our next poll question, do you feel that your current shielding and monitoring methods are accurate?
And so that last poll question has been launched. Thank you, Jackie.
I think it's adequate.
Let's see, we will give participants about 45 seconds to enter their responses. And then we will close that. This is our last one, poll question. Dr. Wilson, are there any additional comments at this time that you would like to share with the audience, you or Jackie?
Well, one question I get sometimes from RSOs and interventional radiologists and radiation physicists is, about the accuracy of these solid state meters. And I can say that a couple of weeks ago, we did a extensive validation thing against using the model that I showed you, which is pretty robust, against an ion chamber compared to each of these other I3 and the X2, which is kind of the survey meter. First of all, they're highly correlated, and that's with scatter radiation. So energy levels in the 45 to 50 kV energy range, and down to a little less than 100 microsieverts per hour, and all the way up to a couple thousand. So the correlation was, I think, surprisingly high between all those. And then we looked at repeatability of the measurements, and the repeatability was also was quite good. I think I know there are some people that on the physics side sometimes that are they love the ion chamber. I love the ion chamber, but these are really excellent measurement tools, and I think the readings for the most part are quite accurate.
Okay, thank you. Great feedback. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close this last poll question, and I can share the results with you. Let's see, 48% of our audience said yes, both are adequate. 18% indicated our shielding is adequate, but our monitoring is not. 16% indicated the opposite, our monitoring is adequate, but our shielding is not. And 19% of the audience indicated no, neither is adequate.
Did we have some questions and answers time?
All right. Yep, it looks like we have had quite a few questions come in. All right, first question. Our anesthesiologists who work in the Cath lab wear leaded PPE and stand behind a rolling shield. They receive less than 1 MSV of exposure per year, and we have discontinued their badging. Do you believe they should still be badged?
100%. I think it's required, actually, that they're badged. So they're in a radiation field, and people make mistakes, and they go places that they don't realize. And so, no, I think the requirement should be that they are badged. And I can tell you, in any other industry but healthcare, that would be required.
All right, next question. This appears to be for the egg nest. Does the carbon fiber frame, shielding, and mattress increase the dose to the patient and thereby increasing scatter?
Yeah, so the short answer is no. The mattress and the sled, have, I mean, it's very slightly more than a mattress alone that you would have in terms of attenuation. Of course, the patient dose of attenuation wouldn't go up. I think people also worry about bounce back from shielding. And what I can tell you is leaded shielding, we've measured this very carefully with a number of RSOs and an ion chamber. And you don't really get you get almost no bounce back with lead. When it's the non-lead equivalent, the antimony bismuth shielding, then you get, we just measured, I think it was like 10% bounce back, something like that. But the dose is so small for the patient, because that's scatter bounce back, it's not primary beam bounce back, that the change in dose for the patient is pretty negligible.
All right. Is the egg nest system just for a cath lab, or can it be implemented in the IR vascular suite?
Yes. Yeah. It was initially designed for cath labs, but with the new Protect system and the Complete system, that really is designed for anywhere around the table. And one of the challenges with interventional radiology is that access is everywhere for interventional radiology. From the foot to the neck, from the right to the left. And so we've had to create this system that really could be mobile around the table and protect. And so particularly for vascular surgery, I tell you, vascular surgeons get an enormous dose, because particularly if they're doing, EVARs, the dose in the abdomen, and radiologists know this, of course, but is so high, they're so close to the source that you can get, and for peripheral vascular to a certain extent also, the ability to move that upper shield around with Complete really provides you with excellent protection.
All right. Have you compared participant dosimeter readings before and after the implementation of the egg nest, and what was the result? Yeah,
so we did a trial of kind of quasi-randomized trial where the egg nest was in one room. The other room had standard shielding, the hanging shield and the table skirt, and operators would go back and forth between rooms, put 9 dosimeters on them, 4, 2 in the shoulders left and right, 2 in the hips left and right, under the lead, same thing, and then 1 hanging from the cap, so kind of getting a brain and lens dose on the left side. And then after 2 weeks, we flipped it and put the egg nest in the other room, so the X-ray part equalized out. Bottom line was 91% reduction in operator dose, so we have that. And when we do an evaluation for this now, everybody, we bring real-time dosimeters with us, and everybody can see their case cumulative dose every time. And so when you start seeing numbers that are, basically are negligible numbers, then it becomes pretty obvious that the shielding you're getting is the shield that you hopefully do want.
How heavy is the egg nest assembly? And since the table has a weight limit, will it limit the patient size that can be used?
Yeah, so it's modular, but if it's fully configured, it's about 100 pounds roughly. And I know that sounds like a lot. And a lot of that's the shielding below the table, because there's so much radiation below the table. You can, if you do have a really heavy patient, there are elements you can just take off and lighten the load. I know a lot of the newer tables are 650-pound limits or something like that. But for the ones that are older, that might be 350 or 400. I would say once a month, they might take off some shielding near the head of the bed to lighten the load, but it's not, so far anyway, it's not been a big issue. And by the way, those big patients are the ones that are, really scattering.
For the i3, can the batteries be replaced, and how long do they last?
I think we're seeing batteries lasting 1 to 2 years, and yeah, they're just like a Duracell watch battery. Very convenient and easy and cost effective to change out.
What specific new workflow changes have staff implemented after monitoring their doses in real time?
Do you want to answer that, Dr. Wilson, or do you want me to?
Well, I can tell you my own personal experience. You know, when you see a lot of bars, you step back or you check your shielding. It's really, you know, the use of shielding is so operator dependent. I mean, for standard shielding, for EGNESS, it's a little less operator dependent because it's all kind of built in. But you know, if you're getting a lot, then you need to do something about it. I have one on my belt long before this that would chirp when it got over a certain dose, and you know, when that thing started to chirp, I paid attention. You know, I went 30 years without that, and probably got a lot. Never knew it was really that high, but when you get a chirp, you do something about it. If you don't hear it, then you know you're probably never going to do anything about your excess dose.
Okay.
It's kind of like, you know, when you have a car and now you've got the sensors, you know, the lane change sensors, and you're going to make a lane change. There's a car in it, and you hear the beep beep beep. You pay attention to that, and it really is very much the same way.
Okay, I am going to answer a question myself. There's a bunch of questions coming in around the same topic, which is asking about the I3 and legal dose of record or records. And the I3 is not a legal dose of record. You would need to continue using your current dosimetry with that. All right, next question. How much increased object image distance, OID, is created between the patient chest and detector by having to avoid collisions with the egg system?
Well, the thickness is the same as a mattress, so it's the same basically.
Okay. What are your average run rates for using the egg nest?
I'm not sure what that refers to.
It says example PCI equals 7.5 FPS.
Oh, the frame rates. Yeah. Well, you know, it depends on the place. So anywhere from some places are even at 3 something. I would say probably the average is between 7.5 and 15, but probably these days almost closer to 7.5. The effectiveness of the system really is irrespective of the frame rate or the dose. And you know, it's like all shielding, it's a filter, and so it's going to filter out X% of photons that are coming at it. And if you've got a really huge patient, you know, then it's going to take out, in the case of complete, it's going to take out 99.3% or something of what's coming at it. If you've got a little tiny patient, it's going to be the same.
Okay. Someone has asked, has there been a comparison study done for systems with an overhead X-ray tube versus the under the table tube?
I don't, well, somebody may have done it a long time ago. I mean, there are basically for, you know, for interventional type stuff, there's really no system that I'm aware of that's an over the head tube. I can tell you, just measuring the tube housing leakage, if you get an X2 meter from the Fluke one, which is great, solid state, instantaneous, and you hold it up to that tube housing and you put a little lead backing on it so you know exactly it's directional, you will be shocked. I was shocked. I mean, I thought the thing was a broken tube housing, and you know, we went to the next room, which was a different manufacturer. We got the same thing. We went to the next room, which I think was a GE, same thing. And you know, it is surprising when this happens.
Okay. Question kind of in that same vein. Do the X-ray vendors need to reconfigure the dose protocols for image quality after implementation of the egg nest?
No. I mean, the effect on image quality is basically 0. I mean, I can't say it's 0, 0. Anything that you put in the way is going to have, you know, a micro effect, but I don't think anybody's ever recalibrated it based on the egg nest. It's just not, it's not that absorptive from a image stand in the image window.
Okay. We're getting close on time. We have a couple minutes left, so we're not going to get to all the questions, but I will continue until we reach the top of the hour. Next question, how easy is it to apply defibrillation pads on the back of a patient's chest after a patient is cradled into the egg nest system?
It's the same, it's basically a mattress with shielding on the side of the mattress, and the carbon fiber frame, it just encloses the mattress, but the patient's lying on top of that. So, from that standpoint, you can use a Lucas device. I mean, all the things that you normally use in a cath lab, you can use it just as if the patient's on the mattress. You do get a little more support from the CPR support, but we've had plenty of patients who are obviously who have procedures, they get very sick, or we've had ECMO patients on the unit, ongoing CPR on the arrival to the lab on the unit. It doesn't, because again, it's just a mattress and a carbon fiber frame. That frame really is the framework that holds the additional shielding, and everything flips down. So if you need to get to the patient, you can just flip it down. I mean, it's made for that. I work in this environment, so I know workflow is everything, and being able to get to the patient is everything. So if you've got a system where you got to wheel it in or out or off, that doesn't work. It's got to be something where things can be moved rapidly in order to get to a sick patient.
Jackie, could you back up one slide, I think, to the slide that has the email addresses on it? Yep, there we go. Thank you. We've had a few requests for that. Is the shielding interchangeable between tables?
Yes. And its current form, it just basically straps onto the table. So, installation, we always see installations, it could take as much as 7 minutes. But it's pretty easy to install, and you can move it. People get new labs, for example, and they'll just move it to the new lab table. Or they might buy a complete system and want that for one room, but they've got another EP room or something where they don't really need complete, and they'll move the other unit over there. So it's pretty easy to move.
Okay. All right. So we are out of time. We have reached the top of the hour. There are still quite a few questions left, and I apologize that we weren't able to get to everyone's question. I will be sharing these with Dr. Wilson and Jackie, and they will reach out with answers. And again, thank you. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Pleasure. I always like telling the story.